My name is Ethan Bellamy. A year ago, I was written off by my own family. Yesterday, at my grandfather's will reading, a homeless man walked in, revealed a video no one expected, and named me the true heir to an $80 million legacy. Now everyone wants me gone again. I returned to Boise in mid-January, Idaho, breathing in cold air that stung my cheeks and seeing frost coating every bare tree limb. I stepped out of the rental SUV and watched Ross Street look a little smaller than I remembered. The crisp winter sky was overcast, the temperature just above freezing, everything gray. My wife Rachel pulled Lily's mittened hand from inside her coat and led her toward the front steps of the old Bellamy estate. Lily's small boots crunched in the frost. I hesitated before stepping up, glancing up at the windows where Dad's car should have been parked, imagining Charles's cold stare waiting behind glass. I haven't set foot in this house for over a year. Since that day in February when I was ousted from Bellamy Developments following a meeting that felt like a trial. I was 47. Now I've watched Dad take over, watched Brandon promoted, watched my phone calls unanswered. I told myself I did not care anymore, but coming back now carrying Rachel and Lily in my arms, I feel it all again. Rachel squeezed my arm as we entered the great foyer, the smell of aged wood and winter polish hitting me like a memory. Lily looked wide-eyed, not sure whether this was adventure or something heavy in the air. I forced a smile for her. We met Mom in the library. Marlene greeted Lily with a weak hug, her eyes damp. She looked older than I expected, her hair more streaked with gray. Dad wasn't there. Brandon arrived late, his cheek curved in that mocking smirk he always gets when he thinks he's winning. At dinner, Brandon spoke first. He commented on how small my share of the estate might be. Now said they had already heard rumors about what Leonard's will would say. Charles remained silent, watching me, the edges of his suit barely fitting his jaw tight. Rachel reached across to slide a loaf of bread toward me. Mom cleared her throat, tried to shift the mood. Back in my old bedroom later, I stared at the phone I used when I worked at the firm, packed away in a drawer. I remember the afternoon I walked into that boardroom meeting, presentation in hand. Convinced I had prepared everything, but I hadn't known Charles had already arranged for someone else to present his plan to the board. I hadn't known Dad had set me up to fail. After that, I left, went quiet. I tucked Lily into the guest room bed, her teddy bear soft under her chin. She murmurs that she missed Grandpa Leonard. My eyes sting. I tell her that Grandpa loved all of us, but sometimes people's hearts get tangled. Lily asks me whether Grandpa wanted me here. I pause, swallowing hard, unsure. Outside the window, I can just hear the wind sigh across the rooftops. The clock ticks past midnight, and I lie awake thinking about what Leonard left behind, about everything unsaid. Morning came with a dull headache and the scent of coffee drifting under the bedroom door. Rachel was already up, her quiet footsteps moving between the kitchen and Lily's room. I sat up slowly, hearing voices downstairs, muffled but sharp in tone. The walls in this house had always carried sound too well. By the time I came down, breakfast was a formality. Mom had set out toast and fruit, though no one seemed to be eating. Charles stood at the head of the table, his posture military, straight hands behind his back. Brandon leaned on the kitchen island, sipping orange juice like he owned the place. Rachel smiled when she saw me, but I could tell she had sensed the tension too. Lily was in the sunroom with Mom reading, thank God. Charles finally looked up and nodded, more like a form of acknowledgement than greeting. Brandon didn't even bother. He let out a quiet laugh and said something under his breath. I chose not to respond. Around lunch, the extended family began to arrive. Aunts, uncles, cousins. Everyone dressed in dark coats, eyes scanning one another like it was a corporate shareholders meeting instead of a gathering to honor the dead. There was no warmth in their hugs, only polite friction. No one asked about me. Not really. Just the usual fake interest in how things had been, what I was doing now. How was the weather in Oregon? I kept my answers brief. Later that afternoon, we gathered in the formal dining room. The chandelier above had been cleaned to a surgical shine, and the polished table reflected every wrinkle in our strained smiles. My seat at the far end made it easier to watch everything. Rachel sat beside me, her hand on my knee, steadying me. Brandon broke the silence first. Surprise, surprise. He leaned forward, elbows on the table like he was preparing for battle. So, Ethan, I heard you're still doing freelance coding from that cabin in Bend. That's what, an hour from anywhere with cell service? I smiled without showing teeth. I do fine. I don't need much these days. Charles cleared his throat, his signal for everyone to drop it, but Brandon wasn't finished. You know, some of us have been working non-stop to keep Bellamy developments from slipping into the ground. I guess you had more important things to do, like writing blog posts in the woods. Rachel stiffened beside me. I could feel the blood in my ears start to pulse. I looked at him. You mean the company that's downsized twice and had to sell off half its real estate holdings last year? He blinked once, caught off guard. Rachel reached for her water. Let's keep this civil. We're here for Leonard. Brandon muttered that Leonard wouldn't have wanted a recluse to return. Only when the will got read. I ignored him. I looked to Mom, who had been silent most of the evening, her eyes watching the napkin she was folding and refolding in her lap. I asked her gently if Leonard had mentioned anything unusual before his death. Did he say anything, seem afraid? Did he complain of pain, anything? Her hands froze, then she shook her head and said he had been tired, just tired, that was all. But I remembered the voicemail he left me 2 weeks before he died. His voice hoarse but sharp. He had said he wanted to talk, that it was important. He never said what it was, and 2 days later he was gone. I pressed. Was there any doctor's report? Did he see anyone? Did he fall? Charles cut in, his voice dry. Ethan, your grandfather passed in his sleep, peacefully. There's no conspiracy here. That wasn't what I asked, I said. He stared at me. Sometimes people die. That's all there is to it. Don't make this into something it's not. Brandon laughed. What, you think someone poisoned him so you'd get written back into the will? Is that it? I looked at him long and slow. You seem nervous for someone who has nothing to hide. He stood up, but Charles put a hand out firm. That's enough. All of you. This is not the time. Rachel leaned in, her voice low in my ear. This isn't worth it. Let's just get through tomorrow. I nodded, but my gut churned. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I went down into the basement to look through the old family records. Leonard used to keep everything: tax filings, letters, journals, in file cabinets that dated back to the 70s. It was musty down there, the air thick with dust and memory. I found an envelope labeled Winter Review 2022. Inside was a spreadsheet of projected losses, handwritten notes in Leonard's script, and a post-it that said, "Find a safe hand." Rachel called down to me after an hour. I tucked the folder into my coat pocket and turned off the light. Back in our room, I lay next to her, wide awake again. Something wasn't right, and I wasn't about to leave until I found out what it was. The morning was colder than the day before, sky bruised with clouds, air sharp enough to bite. We left the house early, Rachel in the passenger seat, Lily staying behind with Mom. The appointment with Leonard's lawyer was set for 10, and I wanted to get there early. I hadn't slept much again. My thoughts kept circling that spreadsheet and the note about a safe hand. Rachel scrolled through her phone quietly as I pulled onto Liberty Avenue. The traffic light ahead turned yellow. That's when I saw him. A man stood near the corner by the entrance of the law offices, bundled in layers of coats. His hair long gray, a beard that hadn't seen scissors in months. He leaned slightly on a crutch and held a cardboard sign that didn't ask for money. It read simply, "We all answer to someone." At first, I kept my eyes forward, thinking maybe I imagined him. But then as we rolled closer to the curb, he raised his hand and pointed directly at me. "Ethan Bellamy," he called out. "Be careful with your car. Someone doesn't want you making it to this meeting." I braked harder than necessary. Rachel looked at me. "Did he just say your name?" I opened the door before she could stop me and walked over. "Do I know you?" "You knew my friend," Silas said. "Leonard Bellamy. He spoke of you often." His voice was rough but deliberate. There was something in his eyes that didn't match his appearance. He wasn't crazy. He knew something. "I saw you at the service," I said slowly. He nodded. "I tried to talk to you, but your father had me removed." I glanced back at the car, heart starting to race. "What do you mean about the car?" Silas stepped back and pointed to the passenger side front wheel. "You've got fluid dripping near your brake line. You might want to look before you drive any farther." Rachel had already stepped out, following my gaze. She crouched down near the tire, her hand hovering. Then she looked at me, alarmed. "It's leaking. Ethan, it's actually leaking." I got down beside her and saw it myself, a slow, amber-colored drip running down the side of the brake assembly. Too clean, too deliberate. I stood up and reached for my phone. Silas was already backing away, disappearing down the sidewalk like he had said what he needed to say. And now it was my turn. I called the only person I trusted in law enforcement. Kevin Sanders answered on the second ring. "You still working mornings?" I asked. "Still sheriff of Ada County until someone decides to fire me," he replied. "I need you to come out to 9th and Liberty. Law office parking lot. It's important." 10 minutes later, his patrol car pulled in behind us. Kevin stepped out wearing his badge and his skepticism. "You're serious," he said, walking over. I pointed to the fluid. Rachel crossed her arms, visibly shaken. "Brake line." "Someone cut it," Kevin muttered, crouching down and peering underneath. "That's a clean slice, not wear and tear." I told him about Silas, about the warning, the name, everything. "You sure this guy knew Leonard?" He said they were old friends, from what I don't know. Maybe from his time in the army. Kevin stood up and pulled out a small notepad. He started scribbling. "I'll file this as tampering. Criminal mischief at minimum. Could have killed someone." "Do I need to file a full statement?" "Yeah, but after your meeting. Leave the car here. I'll have one of my guys tow it and check for prints." He offered us a ride, and 20 minutes later, Rachel and I were stepping into the marble lobby of the law office, both of us quieter than usual. "You think it was Brandon?" she whispered while we waited for the elevator. "I don't know. Could be. Or someone working for him, or Charles." I didn't respond. When we entered the waiting room, everyone was already there. Charles in his suit, reading a financial magazine like nothing mattered. Brandon texting on his phone. Mom looked up and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "What happened to your car?" Charles asked, looking past me out the window. "Flat tire," I said without hesitation. "Had to call in help." Brandon snorted. "Figures." Elaine Porter, the lawyer, stepped out of her office a moment later and waved us in. Her voice was calm but firm. "We're all here now. Let's begin." I took my seat beside Rachel, hands still shaking slightly. But I wasn't thinking about the will yet. I was still thinking about Silas Green, the man in rags who knew my name, who warned me before the brakes could fail. And how the hell he knew exactly when I'd be passing that corner. Elaine's office was colder than I expected, not from the air but from the people. The walls were lined with old law books, dark cherry wood shelves that reached the ceiling. The curtains were drawn halfway, letting in pale light that only deepened the shadows in the room. Everyone sat around the long, oval table, pretending not to stare at one another, but failing. Elaine adjusted her glasses and took her seat at the head of the table. Her silver hair was pinned back tightly, voice calm but sharp as a scalpel. Thank you all for coming today. This reading is to address the last will and testament of Leonard Bellamy. My mother sat beside me, silent, her hands clasped together on her lap. Rachel gave me a glance, subtle and steady, like a lifeline I didn't realize I was clinging to. Elaine reached for the folder in front of her, then paused. Before we begin, I must state that this will was signed and filed with our office in 20. It is the last official version recognized by our records. However, there may be a complication. Charles raised an eyebrow. What kind of complication? At that exact moment, the door opened. Silas Green walked in, slow and deliberate, like he belonged there. Heads turned. Brandon let out a sharp laugh. You've got to be kidding me. Charles stood halfway up from his chair. What is this? Elaine, why is he here? Elaine didn't flinch. He has submitted a document for our review. One that, if verified, may override the will I'm about to read. Brandon scoffed. From a homeless man, Silas held up a flash drive. I brought proof. A video. Leonard wanted it to be seen. He gave this to me before he passed. Charles stepped forward, voice low but dangerous. This is absurd. We're not turning a legal matter into a circus. Elaine took the drive and plugged it into her laptop. If this is what it claims to be, we are legally required to verify it. The screen flickered and silence fell. Then Leonard's face appeared, older than I remembered him, but alert. He was sitting in the den, a familiar painting behind him, his voice clear despite his breath sounding shallow. If you're watching this, I'm gone. And if you're watching this, you're probably surprised. He looked straight at the camera. This isn't easy for me, but I've made mistakes in judgment before, and I won't let pride or pressure decide what happens to my legacy. The room was still. Even Brandon stopped fidgeting. Leonard continued. Charles, I know you expected to take the reins, and Brandon, I know you've been groomed for it. But what I've seen over the past year has changed everything. He paused, took a deep breath. I have watched dishonesty. I have watched the company I built twisted into something cold. I don't want that to continue, and the only one I trust with my name, with this family's values, is Ethan. I didn't move. I couldn't. Rachel reached for my hand under the table, and I barely felt it. I've made arrangements, Leonard said. This recording, along with the updated will, is to be handed to Elaine Porter for filing. Dated October 15, 2022. This will replace any former documents. If anyone tries to challenge this, they can go to court, but they'll be fighting me. The video ended. For a moment, no one said anything. The air felt like it had stopped moving. Elaine turned back to us. I've already reviewed the file. The signature has been verified. The date is correct. Witnesses were present. It is valid. Brandon shot up from his chair. This is a joke. That man was not in his right mind. He was old and paranoid. Charles followed. We will contest this. We have every right to. Elaine looked calm. You are, of course, entitled to challenge the will in probate court. But as of now, Ethan Bellamy is the primary beneficiary of Leonard's estate, including all assets and controlling shares of Bellamy Developments. I felt the eyes in the room shift toward me, some wide with disbelief, others narrow with anger. Charles leaned across the table. What did you promise him, Ethan? What did you do to turn him against his own family? I stared at him. I didn't have to do anything. You managed that all by yourself. Silas stood quietly in the corner, eyes on me, then gave a nod and walked out without a word. I stayed seated not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't trust my legs to hold me. Elaine closed the laptop with deliberate calm, but the room had already fractured into chaos. Brandon shot to his feet, his chair scraping back across the floor. His voice cracked as he barked accusations. "This is insane. That man was clearly manipulated. You expect us to believe he handed everything to Ethan out of nowhere?" Charles didn't rise, but his voice was colder than the wind outside. "This smells like a setup. That video was staged. That man Silas is a fraud." Elaine didn't flinch. "I've reviewed the footage thoroughly. The date stamp, the chain of custody, and the presence of witnesses, 2 of whom I personally contacted, support its validity. The notary on file is licensed in the state of Idaho and verified Leonard's mental state." Charles's jaw tightened, his fingers steepled in front of him, like a man about to deliver a closing argument. "So we're just going to pretend my years-running Bellamy developments mean nothing? That my son's loyalty meant nothing?" Brandon took a step forward. He nearly shouted. He was old. He was sick. Anyone could have fed him lies. "And you, Ethan, you barely showed up for Thanksgiving last year. You think he just handed it all to you out of sentiment?" I looked up at them both, still trying to slow my pulse. The air felt too thin, like my chest couldn't quite fill. I forced myself to speak. "He didn't trust you. That's what this is about. He saw something in the 2 of you and it scared him." "You calling him paranoid now?" Brandon snapped. "No," I said. "I think he was finally seeing clearly." Elaine cleared her throat. "I understand this is difficult, but under Idaho law, unless substantial evidence is presented to prove duress, mental incapacity, or forgery, this most recent will is legally binding." Brandon turned to her. "We'll see you in court then." "That's your right," she said evenly. "But I suggest you consider your position carefully. A court case will bring everything into light, including the company's financial history, internal documents, and personal communications. All of it becomes public record." Charles didn't speak. His eyes were locked on mine, and for a second I saw something I hadn't seen in him in years. Not rage, not power, fear. Elaine looked at me. Leonard also left a statement to be read aloud if this version of the will came into effect. "Shall I continue?" Rachel's hand found mine beneath the table. I gave a small nod. Elaine opened a sealed envelope, unfolded a handwritten page, and began. "To my family, I know this will come as a shock, and likely an offense. But I've watched my legacy shift over the past 10 years into something I barely recognized. What began as a company built on fairness, grit, and transparency has turned into something hollow. Silas Green saved my life once. He reminded me that character matters more than reputation. I asked him to watch me closely these past few months, to tell me if I was still being the man I promised my wife I'd be. He was the only one who gave me honest answers. Ethan, I know I failed you once. I watched them push you out of the company. I stayed silent. That was my mistake. But I saw you rebuild quietly without spite. I trust you. I believe you will carry our name with dignity. That's why everything I have shares estate assets is now yours. Not because of bloodline, but because of character. To the rest of you, this wasn't about love. I loved each of you. But love doesn't mean agreement. Forgive me, or don't. Leonard Bellamy. The silence after was different. Not stunned, but exposed. Every breath seemed louder. No one moved, not even Brandon. Elaine folded the letter and placed it gently back in the envelope. As executor, I will begin the process of transferring assets as outlined. The property and holdings will go into a trust under Ethan's control until the reading is fully processed through probate. That includes Bellamy Ranch and the controlling shares in Bellamy Developments. Brandon turned to my mother. Say something. You can't just sit there. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were distant, fixed on some memory only she could see. When she finally spoke, it was barely more than a whisper. He tried to tell me. I just didn't want to hear it. Charles stood, slowly collected his coat, and walked toward the door. Before stepping out, he turned once more. This isn't over. I didn't say a word. Rachel exhaled beside me. Elaine began collecting papers. Silas was gone. He'd slipped out sometime during the reading. No one had noticed. But I noticed something else. In all the fury, the shouting, the betrayal, I felt no triumph. Just weight, heavy and real, like Leonard had dropped his entire legacy onto my shoulders and dared me not to fail. Kevin called the next morning just after sunrise. His voice was low, but clipped like he'd already had 3 cups of coffee and no good news. It wasn't wear and tear, Ethan. Your brake line was sliced clean with a blade. We're opening a formal investigation under criminal intent. I've filed it as attempted vehicular homicide. I stood in the hallway outside the guest room, staring out the window at the frozen driveway. Rachel was still asleep. Lily had crawled into bed with her sometime after midnight. I want protection, I said. At least patrols. I don't want my family in danger. I'll arrange it, Kevin replied. I've already put in a request for increased drive-bys. If you see anything strange, you call me directly, no dispatch. I thanked him and hung up. An hour later, Mom came to find me. She looked older than yesterday, like the years had finally caught up with her overnight. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a mug of coffee that had gone cold. We need to talk, she said. I nodded and led her to the den. We sat across from each other on Leonard's old leather couches, the fireplace unlit between us. She didn't waste time. It was Brandon, she whispered. He paid someone. I don't know who, but I heard him on the phone 2 nights ago. He said it had to be done before the will was read. He thought if you didn't show up, everything would revert to Charles. My jaw clenched. I gripped the armrest hard. Why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself I heard it wrong, that he was bluffing. But then you almost died, and I couldn't pretend anymore. I stared at her. You need to tell Kevin. This isn't just family drama anymore. This is attempted murder. Her eyes welled up, but she nodded. Rachel found us in the den. I saw the panic in her eyes before she spoke. There's someone at the gate, she said. A woman with a camera crew, says she's with the Chronicle, wants to talk about the will. I stood, already feeling the headache forming. Of course the press would find us. Of course someone leaked it. By the time I made it to the front door, Ava Murphy was already halfway up the path. She was dressed in a sharp coat heels, somehow not sinking into the icy gravel. A cameraman trailed behind her and a boom mic hovered just out of view. Mr. Bellamy, she said brightly, Ava Murphy, Channel 9. Investigative news. I'm sure you've heard by now that your grandfather's revised will has made headlines across the state. I didn't answer. We're hoping for a statement. Your family's been a pillar in Ada County for decades, and now with accusations of forgery and an alleged assassination attempt. We're not making a statement, I said. She smiled unfazed. Just a few questions. Off the record if you prefer. Not now. She tilted her head, her tone softening just enough to sound human. People are curious, Mr. Bellamy. About you. About the man your grandfather trusted when no one else did. If there's more to this story, this is your chance to shape it. Rachel appeared beside me, arms crossed. You need to leave. This is private property. Ava nodded slowly like she expected that answer. I'll be back, she said. This story is just getting started. We watched them walk back to the van, the cameraman still filming until the very end. Inside, Rachel paced the kitchen while I stood by the sink. "We can't stay here," she said. "Not with Lily, not with all this attention. It's not safe, I know. But if we leave, they win. They'll spin it. They'll say I fled. I don't care what they say. I care about our daughter being in the middle of this circus. Someone tried to kill you, Ethan. That's not politics. That's war." I took a deep breath. Just one more day. Let me talk to Kevin. Let me get control of this house of the company. Once I have the legal authority, we'll go. She didn't answer, but I saw the fear in her eyes. That night, after Lily was asleep again, I walked the perimeter of the property myself. Every tree branch, every shadow, every unfamiliar sound made me flinch. The Bellamy estate had once felt like a fortress. Now it felt like a target. I met Danny Kirkwood in the back booth of a diner just off Capitol Boulevard. He still wore that same frayed Boise State hoodie from our engineering days, but the bags under his eyes were new. He slid a manila envelope across the table without saying a word and took a sip of his coffee, like it might erase the weight of what he just handed me. "You sure you want this?" he asked. I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of internal audit memos, off-the-record emails, and a flagged PDF marked Q2 adjustments. Confidential. "I've been asking myself that all week," I said. "But yeah, I need the truth." Danny leaned closer. "Leonard found out, didn't he?" I nodded. "He called me 6 months ago, wanted me to double-check the quarterly reports, said something didn't smell right. He was right. Charles has been shuffling debt for years, moving liabilities through shell projects. Brandon helped him forge the projections to the board. They used fake clients, ghost development plans, and even manipulated subcontractor payouts. The company should have filed Chapter 11 2 years ago." I felt my stomach twist. That's why he changed the will. He knew the company was dying from the inside. Danny looked away. He didn't want a war, Ethan. He just wanted a clean break. But I think he knew Charles would never let that happen. The following day I called Elaine. She advised me to gather the board for an emergency shareholders meeting citing fiduciary malpractice. As controlling trustee, I had that right now, and more importantly, I had proof. The meeting was scheduled in the Bellamy Development's boardroom. I hadn't walked into that building in over a year. The air still smelled like polish and carpet glue. Every step echoed like I didn't belong there. But this time I did. Elaine sat at my side. Across from us, Charles and Brandon looked like they hadn't slept in days. The rest of the board filed in slowly, faces guarded, eyes darting. Then the door opened and Ava Murphy stepped in with her cameraman. She wore a blazer this time and carried her press badge like a weapon. "This is a closed meeting," Charles barked. Elaine shook her head. "As of this morning, a subpoena was filed for these records. Ms. Murphy has every right to document what is now a matter of public interest, particularly if criminal charges are considered." Brandon muttered a curse. I stood and cleared my throat. "Before we begin, I want to thank you all for coming. I know emotions are high, but what I'm about to present is not speculation. It is verified data supported by internal audits and third-party corroboration." I opened the folder and distributed copies to each board member. You'll find documentation of altered financial reports, fabricated assets, and falsified client contracts. These actions were orchestrated by Charles Bellamy with the assistance of Brandon Bellamy. Brandon lunged forward. "You're lying. This is all circumstantial." Elaine raised a hand. "We will allow each person to speak in turn." Charles stared me down. "You're trying to destroy the company out of revenge." I looked at him calmly. "No, you already destroyed it. I'm trying to save what's left." A murmur spread around the table. I continued. 6 months ago, Leonard initiated a contingency plan. He transferred control of the trust holding the company shares to a third-party attorney. That trust was reassigned to me upon his death pending confirmation of board-level misconduct. I have that confirmation now. A board member named Owens, who had been silent until now, spoke. "I want to motion for an independent audit." Seconded, another said. A vote passed within minutes. Ava caught every second on tape. Charles's face was crimson. Brandon had gone pale. I ended the meeting with a statement. From this moment forward, all operations will be reviewed. Any decisions made under false pretenses will be reversed. The Bellamy name deserves better. As the boardroom cleared, Ava stepped toward me. That was unexpected. I looked at her. You wanted a story. You got one. Outside, the sky had started to snow. Light flakes drifted down like ash from a fire long burned out. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt raw, but for the first time I felt like the truth had room to breathe. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing, subdued but relentless. Rachel was already up in the kitchen, whispering on the line. I rubbed my eyes and followed the voice half-dressed to the living room. The television was on. Channel 9 News. Ava Murphy's face filled the screen. Headline at the bottom scrolled across in white letters on blue background. The revised will has gone viral. The headline she read said, Ethan Bellamy inherits Bellamy Developments and the ranch. Smaller print added the real bombshell. Video and updated will submitted by a homeless man named Silas. I sank into the sofa, heart thudding. Lily sat on the floor clutching her soft blanket, looking between Rachel and me. Senses already picking up something bigger than her years. I pulled her into my lap. Rachel did not look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the screen. I turned off the TV. She rubbed Lily's back. She said softly that she read the comments online last night. Justice for Ethan was trending. Some people saying that Leonard made the right decision, others saying it's a disgrace, some angry at Charles, some at me for abandoning the family. She asked if I was okay. I wasn't, but I said I was. I stood up to get dressed. Coffee would help, I thought. I needed something solid, something normal. I got a call from Kevin. He said he saw coverage at Precinct. Local police station had been getting calls. Safety concerns for the estate, threats over social media. He asked if I wanted protection detail and asked whether I wanted to file a restraining order against Brandon and Charles. Rachel shook her head. Not yet, she said. Don't let this tear more apart. I agreed. By midday, Ava and her crew were outside the estate gates. They set up cameras, a microphone clipped to a reporter's jacket, lights pointed in our direction. The crew wanted a statement. I leaned against the inside of the front door, watching. Ava called through the gate. Mr. Bellamy, thank you for speaking with us. The community has many questions about the video and the will revision. People want answers. Could you explain what Leonard saw in you that he didn't in others I did not answer? Rachel came beside me and told me not to engage, that she would handle Lily if things got ugly. I felt the weight of every passing car, every pedestrian eyeing us, every phone lifted toward the gate. The cold turned into a claw in my chest. I told Rachel that I needed to go upstairs, needed quiet. Upstairs in Lily's room, I watched her draw beside moonlight leaking through the window. She drew a house, big tree, a man and a woman standing in front, Grandpa Leonard in the background, small but smiling. I kissed her forehead. I can't protect her from everything, I said, but I will try. Night came full and dark. The wind rattled windows. I heard a low shout outside, but it could have been the wind. I stayed by Lily, watching shadows pass underneath door jambs, listening to what I hoped would be nothing. I thought of what Grandpa Leonard said in the video about character. I thought of the nights he invited Silas to stay by his side when no one else would. I thought of the file Danny gave me. I thought of promises and failures. I drifted off to sleep with Lily's soft breathing in my ear, the weight of the morning still pressing on my shoulders, and the unknown of what tomorrow would bring. I woke early that morning before dawn, feeling the weight of what was coming. I dressed quietly, slipping into my coat in the pale light seeping through Lily's bedroom door. Rachel still slept curled under blankets, oblivious to the restless knot tightening in my chest. I kissed Lily's forehead and stepped into the cold hallway. The courthouse was a gray building set back from the road on 2nd Street in downtown Boise. Snow crusted the sidewalks and the lamps flickered. I felt exposed. This was the moment that would decide more than inheritance. It would decide whether truth mattered at all. We entered the courtroom where sunlight filtered through tall windows, making dust motes dance in the air. Elaine Porter stood with her files. Her expression was steady. Across from her, Charles and Brandon sat flanked by their lawyers. Tension hummed like electricity. Elaine called the court to order. Judge Ramirez, austere and poised, reviewed paperwork, signature stamps, exhibits. I listened hard as the clerk called the case Bellamy versus Estate of Leonard Bellamy. I swallowed. This was public now. My heart pounded as Elaine presented the video. Leonard's face appeared again on screen, filtered but authentic. I heard my own name in his voice. I watched Charles's face deepen in red. I watched Brandon shift uncomfortably, glancing at his counsel. Silas Green took the stand next. I held Rachel's hand in the gallery. Silas described nights he spent by Leonard's side. He testified Leonard was lucid, able to sign documents, able to speak clearly. He spoke of Leonard's obsession over fairness, the guilt he carried over pushing Ethan out, the fear he had Charles would subvert the company. The prosecutor asked detailed questions about Leonard's mental state, dates, who visited, medical records. Silas said Leonard had checkups. He mentioned when Leonard asked for Danny's audit work. He mentioned entries in Leonard's journal. It felt surreal hearing someone who the family once dismissed as invisible now commanding the room. Then Charles's lawyer stood. He objected to the admissibility of the video, disputed the chain of custody, claimed Silas was under duress or undue influence. He questioned whether Leonard signed voluntarily or was pressured. Brandon's lawyer whispered in his ear. I saw fear there, betrayal, maybe regret, but I stayed composed. Elaine countered with evidence. The notary who witnessed the signing, the timestamps, witnesses who had come forward. She had documentation, affidavits, medical clearances. The judge nodded, reviewing folders. Late morning passed into lunch. While court was recessed, I saw board members whispering among themselves. Some avoided my gaze, others glanced at me with something like respect. News reporters scribbled in notebooks outside chamber doors. Evidence came through anonymously over email from a whistleblower inside the company. A PDF of reports with financial spreadsheets showing Charles had misrepresented liabilities, inflated profits, hidden losses. The report appeared similar to the documents Danny shared, but with internal letterhead watermarks, things that made it impossible to deny. Elaine submitted those documents. The judge reviewed them, eyebrows drawn. Charles's lawyer tried to argue they were fabricated, but the authenticity was too high. The whistleblower had supplied matching printed copies, and company archives held backup files. The judge paused, tapped his gavel. Court resumed, and Elaine asked Charles to respond. His face was pale, his voice hollow. He claimed Leonard had lost capacity in the final months. He claimed undue influence. But Silas and Danny had medical records, and Leonard's financial planners gave sworn statements that he was explaining decisions clearly. Brandon spoke up. I never thought Dad would do this. I never thought he'd disrespect what we built together. I whispered to Rachel I felt sick. She squeezed my hand. She whispered back that I were doing right. By late afternoon, arguments wound down. Judge Ramirez said he would take all submissions under advisement, set dates for more filings, ordered discovery of all remaining internal communications between Charles and third parties. The judge cautioned both sides that public trust was on the line. Outside the courtroom afterwards, flashes popped. Reporters shouted questions. I leaned into my coat collar, pulled Rachel beside me. Lily clung to Rachel's skirt, uncomprehending of cameras and microphones, but she sensed the tension. Back in the car, I saw Charles and Brandon exit the courthouse too. They avoided eye contact. Neither looked me in the face. I watched their shoulders slump. Rachel drove us home. Snowflakes fell through the windshield and I listened to silence. Lily asleep on the seat behind me. Inside, Mom was waiting. She opened her arms but didn't say anything. Neither did I at first. I sat with her, felt her hands shake. She said softly that Leonard would have been proud. I nodded without speaking. Night came and I tucked Lily into bed. Rachel stayed with her until she fell asleep. I sat by the window staring at our home lit softly against the dark sky. I thought of everything Leonard had trusted me with. The video, the evidence, the responsibility, and I wondered whether this alone would be enough. The judge's gavel fell light, echoing in the courtroom. I felt the room shift like the air had changed direction. The new will is valid, Judge Ramirez said. Everything Leonard set in motion is to be honored. Controlling shares of Bellamy Developments are under my authority. The ranch belongs to me. I took a shallow breath, trying to let it in. Charles stared, face expressionless, as though he didn't quite believe what he heard. Brandon's shoulders sagged. I listened to their lawyers whispering, papers rustling. Elaine exhaled quietly to my left, clasping the folder she had held throughout the trial. Outside court, the press camera lights felt like strobes. Reporters shouted questions. Is this over yet? They asked about fraud allegations, about financial losses, about what I was going to do now. I spoke only enough to confirm that Leonard's wishes would be respected and that there would be no champagne toast from me. I said family and legacy matter more than celebration. Rachel took my hand as the crowd parted. Lily peeked from behind Mom's coat. I saw in Lily's face confusion mixed with relief. Mom held me for a moment, no words, just that trembling hug that said she knew what this meant. Back at home later that evening, silence thickened the hallways. I wandered through the rooms of the Bellamy estate, footsteps soft against the carpet. The walls held echoes of laughter we used to share, of family dinners. Pictures on walls, Leonard's portrait over the fireplace. It felt empty. Brandon sat alone in what used to be my old workspace. He didn't look up when I passed. Charles had locked himself in his office. Mom stood in the foyer, eyes glazed with tears, not angry now, just sad. Rachel found me by the fireplace, staring at a small wooden box Leonard had carved. Memory of me as a child, rough-hewn but loving in his hands, polished by time. I picked it up. It smelled like cedar and old varnish. We need to decide something, Rachel said. You don't have to shoulder this alone. I nodded. I had been thinking about the ranch, about what it meant to control it, and what Leonard wanted it to be. He had always spoken of giving back to the community, helping veterans, helping families who didn't have what we did. After dinner, I called Elaine. I told her I would not keep the estate property for myself. Not the mansion, not the land. I want Bellamy Center, the ranch lands, turned into something that helps others. Her voice cracked a little. That is very much in line with what Leonard planned. Very noble of you. It felt right, but I still have the hollow ache inside. Seeing Charles confronted with his own wrongdoing, Brandon stripped of his pride, did not bring peace. It brought responsibility. That night I stood by Lily's bedroom door. She was asleep. Rachel had already turned off the light. I closed the door gently. I walked to the window and looked out over the grounds, the moon soft on snow trees casting long shadows. The house so big at night, I whispered to myself that I would honor Leonard's dream, not just his name, his values, justice, generosity, truth, love, but peace still felt distant, and tomorrow would demand more of me than winning in court. I arrived at the shelter in South Boise just after sunrise. Frost rimed the edges of the parking lot. Silas stood by the door wrapped in a heavy jacket, hair still wild with cold. He looked smaller than I'd expected, but in his eyes I recognized resolve. Rachel held Lily's hand as we got out of the car. Lily, half asleep, rubbed her eyes, puzzled by the unfamiliar benches and smell of old blankets. I led them inside. The walls were lined with cots and donated coats. The air carried the smell of coffee and hope. I saw familiar faces I'd passed on the street before. Men and women, veterans, some bearing scars visible, others invisible. Silas stood in front of tables piled with donated goods. When he saw me, he straightened. I handed him an envelope thick with papers. "These are legal documents," I said. "Leonard's promise, Ethan's share." "The paperwork turns what he told you into what he meant." He nodded, eyes blinking in the light. He accepted the envelope with both hands. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You kept your word." Rachel crouched beside Lily, offering her hot chocolate. The three of us stood apart, the crowd noticing but giving us space. Silas motioned toward the back room where boxes of food job postings, resume help resources were being organized. He spoke of his time alone after his discharge, how Leonard had visited him, secretly asked questions, listened. Silas said he kept a journal Leonard would often ask to read to know if he was still grounded in what mattered. I walked with him through the shelter. I saw a wall of veteran portraits, faces layered in wrinkles and stories. He paused in front of a black and white photo of a young Leonard in uniform. "That is the man who saw me," he said. "Not the one everyone else saw." Lily tugged at my coat. "Daddy, did Grandpa Leonard ever love you?" she asked. I knelt beside her. I braced myself. He smiled in his own quiet way, I said. "But sometimes love is messy, Lily. Sometimes it comes wrapped in silence and mistakes. And what he left for me, the chance to make things right, that was love too." Silas placed his hand on my shoulder. Together we stood facing the rows of veterans seated at folding tables, waiting for meals, waiting for someone to believe in them again. I thought of Leonard's ranch, the land, the barns, the fields. I thought of the center I would build there where people could work, grow food, learn trades, give back what was taken away. Rachel gently touched my arm. "I can do this," she said, "for Lily, for us." Inside the shelter, I spoke to a few veterans. One named Marcus, who lost his footing in life after an injury, asked quietly if there would be job training in the center. Silas told him yes. "We'll offer that. We'll offer more." I looked around at faces hardened by hardship. I realized how much Leonard's dream had been about community, about unseen people. I wondered how the Bellamy name would carry forward through this. Would people remember? Would they believe? As we left the shelter, the morning sun weak above rooftops, I felt lighter. Not triumphant, not healed, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something I almost forgot: clarity. Lily leaned against me as we drove away. She asked if we could stop by Grandpa's ranch tomorrow. I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, we will go." Night came again quietly. I watched her sleep in her bed. Rachel closed the door softly. I stood in the hallway, the envelope in my pocket, cold against my thigh. I looked at the moonlight through the lace curtains, shadows dancing across the floor. I whispered a promise to myself that this legacy would be more than a name, that silence had ended not with vengeance but with action. A year has passed since the doors of Bellamy Center first opened in early spring in Boise. The fields of the ranch are now alive with work boots, tool sheds, and greenhouses. Veterans repairing fences, formerly homeless people tending gardens, neighbors bringing seedlings, birds nesting in old barns that were restored by hands that once trembled or gave up hope. I walk through the orchard Leonard planted decades ago. The apple trees are heavy with fruit. The scent of blossoms echoes in the breeze. Rachel stands beside me, Lily clutching a basket of fresh apples. She smiles when she sees me approach. The center's staff call to her from across the courtyard. There are children planting herbs, veterans hammering boards, people harvesting produce. I pause. I allow myself a moment to believe that this is what Leonard wanted. Silas has been ill for some months. I knew the warning signs, but you never think it'll hit him this soon. He passed quietly in the night in his small apartment near the edge of town. His breathing had grown shallow, and in the early hours it simply stopped. Rachel called me to his bedside. I held his hand. His eyes opened one last time, and he whispered Leonard's name. He thanked me for giving him something he thought he might never see, that he died believing that someone had kept faith. After funeral arrangements, I found a letter among his things, written on crisp cream paper, his handwriting shaky but loving. He wrote that Leonard had given him a purpose, that caring for Leonard, speaking truth when others would not, had been his final act of service. He said he saw in me something that Leonard saw too: honesty, grit, the choice to stand even when it's easier to hide. He thanked me not for taking the company or the ranch, but for helping silence be something we moved past. A few days later, I visited the orchard. The gates squeaked under my hand. Sunlight dappled between branches. I carried Silas's letter in a pocket. I lingered under the apple trees, watching bees cluster around blossoms, fruit heavy on limbs. I felt the chill thaw in my bones. Lily ran ahead and called me back. She held up a small carved wooden figurine she found in an old tool shed. "Grandpa Leonard carved apples in trees," she said. I smiled and tucked the figurine into my jacket pocket. That night I sat in what used to be Leonard's study. The windows open a crack for the first warm summer air. Moonlight fell over old Ledger's tools, his leather chair. Rachel and Lily slept in the room next door. I listened to silence that felt different now, not empty but expecting. I thought about all that had been lost. I thought about betrayal, shame, heartbreak. I thought about the years I spent away trying to forget. I made decisions this year that people in town did not all like. I refused offers from investors who wanted to turn the ranch into luxury homes. I refused to sell land for profit. I turned down contracts that required me to compromise values Leonard taught me. Because what's the point of legacy if you lose yourself building it? Rachel said once that I remind her of Leonard more each day, that she sees the way I pause before saying yes, the way I ask whether something honors what he stood for. Sitting there in the study, I opened Silas's letter again. He wrote that he understood the weight that inheritance carries, that it is not just money or buildings or a name, it is trust, and that I should use what was given not to prove myself, but to lift others. I allowed tears, not of sorrow now, but of release. I stood and walked to the window that overlooks the orchard. Moonlight turned the leaves silver. I placed the letter on the desk and rested my hand on a wooden carving of Leonard's apple tree. I whispered into the stillness that I would not let the past repeat itself, that what came next will be built on truth, compassion, courage. If there were one chance to do it all over, would I choose justice or revenge?